Some wounds never heal, they just teach us how to help others carry the same pain. When Tim Allen walked onto the Tonight Show stage with that familiar warmth and comedic presence that had made him America's favorite TV dad, nobody expected him to reveal the most devastating chapter of his healing mission. Jimmy Fallon had planned a nostalgic interview about Tim's comedy career and recent projects. The audience was ready for the dad jokes and heartwarming stories that always came with a Tim Allen appearance. But what Tim was about to confess would silence Studio 6B and prove that sometimes the most important performances happen not on television sets, but in hospital rooms where children face the same tragedy that shaped his entire life. The cameras were rolling, the audience already smiling at Tim's opening humor, and then he spoke 15 words that changed everything. I visit kids dying from car crashes because I lost my dad the same way when I was 11. What came next wasn't just television, it was a revelation about trauma, loss, and the sacred responsibility of ensuring that children facing death in mangled metal don't have to die alone, surrounded only by machines and medical procedures instead of love and paternal comfort. Tim Allen had always been known for his comedy rooted in family values and fatherhood, the actor who turned everyday parenting struggles into universal humor, who made millions of fathers feel understood through his portrayal of bumbling but loving dads. But what audiences didn't know was that Tim's understanding of fatherhood had been shaped by its sudden absence when his own father was killed in a car accident when Tim was just 11 years old, and that trauma had awakened a calling to be the father figure that dying children needed in their final moments. The final ride, hospital visits, had begun 8 years earlier, during the anniversary period of his father's death, when Tim was struggling with survivor's guilt and the randomness of traffic fatalities. The memory of losing his father so suddenly and traumatically had given him profound insight into what children experienced when car accidents stole their futures, and how the sterile hospital environment often failed to provide the paternal comfort that dying children desperately needed. When my dad died in that car crash, I was suddenly a kid without a father, trying to understand why good people die in such violent, random ways. Tim later explained with tears, I spent my childhood missing him, wishing he could have been there for all the moments that mattered. Decades later, I realized there are kids dying in hospitals right now who are experiencing that same loss, except they're the ones dying and they need someone to be the dad they're losing. Vehicular accidents are the leading cause of death for children and teenagers, claiming roughly 2,000 young lives annually in the United States. These sudden traumatic deaths often leave families devastated and children fighting for their lives in intensive care units where medical procedures take precedence over emotional comfort and family connection. These kids are facing death in the most traumatic way possible, Tim said, with obvious emotion. They're not dying peacefully at home surrounded by family. They're dying from massive trauma, connected to machines, in pain, often separated from their parents who are dealing with their own injuries or are too devastated to function. These children need someone strong, someone paternal, someone who can sit with them and help them not be afraid. Tim's first encounter with a child dying from a car accident had been through a chance visit to Detroit Medical Center, where he had been visiting another family friend. 8-year-old Michael had been in intensive care for 3 days after a drunk driver had hit his family's car, killing his parents instantly and leaving Michael with injuries that doctors said were incompatible with life. Michael was alone except for medical staff, Tim remembered with profound sadness. His parents were dead. His grandparents lived across the country and couldn't get there in time, and this little boy was facing death without any family present. When I saw him lying there, so small and broken, I thought about my own son at that age and how terrified I would want someone to comfort him if I couldn't be there. The conversation with Michael's medical team had revealed the heartbreaking reality that many children die from car accidents without family present, either because their family members were also killed in the crash or because surviving relatives were too injured or traumatized to provide emotional support. Michael looked at me and asked if I was his dad because he couldn't remember what had happened. Tim recalled with tears. The doctors had explained that he probably wouldn't survive his injuries, but in that moment, this dying little boy needed a father figure, and I couldn't walk away from that need. Working with hospital social workers and child life specialists, Tim had developed an approach that provided paternal presence and comfort to children dying from vehicular accidents, particularly those who were facing death without family support. These visits aren't about comedy or entertainment, Tim emphasized. They're about being a father figure for children who are dying violently and alone. I sit with them, hold their hands, tell them they're safe, help them not be afraid. Sometimes I'm the last person they see, and I want that person to be someone who loves them like a father. Over 8 years, Tim's Final Ride program had reached 94 children who were dying from car accident injuries. Each visit was coordinated with medical staff and focused on providing paternal comfort and presence during the most frightening experience a child could face. I worked with this 12-year-old girl named Emma, whose entire family had been killed in a head-on collision, Tim remembered with obvious love. Emma had survived for 6 days with massive internal injuries, and she kept asking for her daddy. The medical staff didn't know what to tell her because her father had died at the scene. The profound moment had come when Tim was able to sit with Emma during her final hours, holding her hand and providing the paternal comfort she was crying for during her last moments of consciousness. Emma asked me to tell her a bedtime story like her daddy used to do, Tim said through tears. I told her about a little girl who was so brave and so loved that even when she had to go to sleep forever, her family would be waiting for her with the biggest hug she'd ever received. Emma smiled and said, "Tell Daddy I wasn't scared," before she passed away. The approach worked because it acknowledged that children facing traumatic death needed paternal strength and comfort that could help them feel safe and loved during their most vulnerable moments. There was this 10-year-old boy named Alex who had been in a coma for 2 weeks after a multi-car accident that killed his mother, Tim shared with emotion. Alex's father was in another hospital with his own critical injuries, and Alex was dying alone while his dad fought for his own life. Alex's case had been particularly heartbreaking because Tim was able to serve as a bridge between a dying child and a father who desperately wanted to be present but was physically unable to provide comfort. Alex woke up during one of my visits and asked where his mom and dad were, Tim explained. I was able to tell him that his mom was in heaven waiting for him and that his daddy was hurt but loved him more than anything in the world. Alex died holding my hand while I told him how proud his father was of his bravery. The most profound moments came when Tim realized that his presence allowed dying children to feel loved and protected during their final moments, transforming traumatic medical deaths into experiences of paternal love and safety. Alex's father survived his injuries and later told me that knowing his son didn't die alone, that someone had been there to provide fatherly love during his last moments, was the only thing that allowed him to cope with losing both his wife and child, Tim said, with tears. Several families had expressed that Tim's presence during their children's final moments had provided comfort not just to the dying children, but to surviving family members who couldn't be present during those crucial final hours. Tonight's appearance on The Tonight Show was supposed to focus on Tim's latest comedy projects and his reflections on his long career in entertainment. Jimmy had planned to discuss his approach to family comedy, maybe get him to share some funny parenting stories, definitely tap into the nostalgic warmth that made him such a beloved figure. The interview had started with Tim's characteristic humor and relatability. He had shared funny anecdotes about his career, discussed his approach to comedy, and had the audience laughing with his observations about fatherhood and middle age. But when Jimmy asked about what fatherhood had taught Tim, about what really matters in life, and whether his own childhood experiences had influenced his approach to being a father figure to others, something shifted in his expression. The question had been meant to explore his personal philosophy, but it had touched on something much more painful that Tim had been considering sharing publicly for the first time. "You know, Jimmy," Tim said, his voice taking on unusual gravity, "losing my father when I was 11 taught me that kids can face death without warning, without preparation, without their parents there to comfort them, and that knowledge has led me to some of the most important work I've ever done." The audience grew quieter, sensing that Tim was moving into territory that was more serious than his usual family-friendly humor. "It sounds like you have some personal experience helping children through very difficult situations," Jimmy said with genuine concern. Tim was quiet for a moment, his usual comedic energy replaced by profound vulnerability. "I do, and it comes from understanding what it's like to lose a father suddenly and violently, and realizing that there are kids dying in hospitals right now from car crashes who need someone to be the father they're losing." The studio was completely focused on Tim's words now, the energy shifting from entertainment to something much more meaningful and heartbreaking. "Tim, are you working with children who are dying from car accidents?" Jimmy asked softly. Tim's eyes filled with tears, a sight that was particularly powerful coming from someone known for his strength and humor. "For 8 years, I've been visiting kids who are dying from car crash injuries, children who are facing death alone because their parents were killed in the same accident or are too injured to be there. These kids need a father figure during the most terrifying experience of their lives." The audience was completely silent now, witnessing a side of Tim Allen that transcended his comedy persona, the raw grief of someone who had transformed his own childhood trauma into a mission to comfort other children facing similar loss. "Jimmy, can I tell you about something that's taught me what being a father really means?" Tim asked, his voice growing stronger despite his tears. "Please," Jimmy replied, clearly understanding that something profound was being shared. Tim took a deep breath and spoke directly to the camera. "I visit children dying from car accidents through my Final Ride program, 94 kids over 8 years who are facing death from the same kind of trauma that took my father, helping them feel safe and loved during their last moments." Jimmy's expression changed completely as he grasped what Tim was describing. "You're providing paternal comfort to children dying from car crashes? I'm making sure that kids who are dying violently and alone have someone there who loves them like a father," Tim replied with conviction. "These children shouldn't have to face death afraid and by themselves. They deserve to feel protected and cherished even if their own parents can't be there." Tears were streaming down Jimmy's face. "Can you tell us about one of these children?" "Emma was 12 when her family's car was hit by a drunk driver," Tim said, his voice becoming tender. "Her parents and brother died instantly, and Emma survived for 6 days with massive injuries. She kept asking for her daddy, not understanding that he was gone." Tim paused, gathering himself to continue. "I sat with Emma during her final hours, holding her hand and telling her bedtime stories like her father used to do. She asked me to tell her daddy that she wasn't scared, and then she passed away feeling safe and loved." "How do you handle the emotional weight of this work?" Jimmy asked through his tears. "By remembering that these children get to die, feeling cherished instead of alone," Tim replied with profound wisdom. "My father died instantly in his accident, but these kids are conscious and afraid. If I can be there to provide paternal love during their last moments, then his death had meaning because it taught me how to help other children not die afraid." The audience was openly emotional, many people crying as they witnessed this revelation about Tim's private work providing fatherly comfort to dying children. "Tim, how has this work changed your understanding of fatherhood?" Jimmy asked. "It's taught me that being a father isn't just about the children you raise. It's about being willing to provide paternal love to any child who needs it, especially when they're facing their greatest fear. Tim replied with hard-won understanding. These dying children showed me that love doesn't require biology, it just requires showing up when a child needs a daddy. As the segment concluded, something unprecedented happened. The entire studio audience rose in sustained applause that lasted over 6 minutes, but it wasn't just appreciation. It was recognition of love transcending tragedy, acknowledgement that they had witnessed someone transforming personal loss into comfort for the most vulnerable children. Tim's revelation became one of the most moving Tonight Show segments in the program's history, inspiring conversations about childhood trauma, the importance of providing comfort to dying children, and the power of turning personal grief into service for others. Most importantly, Tim's disclosure had shown that sometimes the greatest gift a father can give is not to his own children, but to children who are dying without paternal love, proving that the heart of fatherhood is not biology, but the willingness to provide safety and comfort to any child who needs it.